Welcome to the Lubbock or Leave It podcast, a recruiting podcast on Red Raider Sports. My name is Matt Clare. He's Ben Golan. As always, we are brought to you by Carnley Properties. Carnley Properties for any real estate needs in the greater Austin area, whether that's residential, in the city, outside, in the burbs, ranch land, farmland, you name it. Clayton Carnley and his team can get you hooked up. Not only are they great at what they do, but they're great Red Raiders and they're longtime members of Red Raider Sports. So as always, we'll put their information here below the player, and we appreciate them sponsoring the pod. Ben, it's been a while, man. Been sick over here. So how's it going in your world?
I mean, the hoops game last night was pretty good. So no complaints. Red Raiders are riding high right now, but it doesn't get any easier with another game tomorrow. So got a quick turnaround. But man, I'm excited. The dead period ends in a couple days, so things pick up in terms of recruiting, which is what we do. So I mean, good time of year.
Yeah, I mean, we'll post this on, it's Wednesday evening. So tonight or tomorrow, Thursday, I think the recruiting dead period will be over. So definitely interesting. I had written about a quarterback prospect who said that Zach Kitley was going to come see him in person. So, I truly do think after, you combine an open contact period with the junior day that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And, everything we've seen from this staff is they're pretty much about that action. So I think they're going to gather that kind of discovery data they need on some of these prospects and make some decisions pretty quick. Before we really dive into kind of the future, if you will, with 2023 beyond and the junior day and some of that info, Ben, it's been a while. So I wanted to recap, maybe not name by name, but, before when we were doing some show prep, we talked about, some of the guys that have visited recently, some of the transfer targets, some of the guys that have already committed and agreed to come and enroll early. I think the number at last count, between actual early enrollees, transfers and walk-on types is like 17 right now and counting. So these guys are in town, they're moved in, they're going to classes. But what's some, maybe give us a recap, a latest greatest on some of the guys the coaches are trying to add or have added recently.
Yeah, so today, as we record, it's the 12th. Today was the first day of classes, I believe. So all the mid-year additions, you got 5 high school guys and then all the transfers. I thought one of the interesting things, I posted a thread on Saturday, found out that, a guy like Jacob Rodriguez, who the former staff really wanted, he kind of pops up and, there he is. He's enrolled at Texas Tech. And then we see him in different, social media tweets and different things like that. So he actually played on offense at Virginia, but we believe he's going to be playing defense, a linebacker, a safety. We'll see which role he fits best in. But I mean, this was a fairly highly recruited guy. Baylor was recruiting him too, which, there's the connection again. To the new coaches and he's a Red Raider. So I think he was a good addition. And then, beyond that, the coaches hosted several offensive line prospects, transfer guys last week. Michael Shanahan posted about him a lot. He's a FCS All-American from Tennessee Martin. And things were looking real good for the Red Raiders there, not gonna lie. I was feeling pretty confident. And then an hour or two before his visit, here comes Oklahoma State. They offer him, the feedback from Michael was that he had a great visit, but he did want to go see Stillwater. So he leaves tomorrow, Thursday, and will return Saturday. And so he told me he'll make his decision sometime this weekend. And so, a Big 12 battle right there. And an interesting side note with him, his brother, TJ, a 5-star recruit, right? And so I'm not sure because it was a dead period, but family, what have you, he was able to go on the visit with him and experience Texas Tech. So we'll need to catch up with him and get his thoughts. But he's a top 10 kid in the country, 5-star recruit. That's definitely impressive. You get a guy like that. And then, the last guy I wanted to mention, another offensive lineman who actually committed and enrolled, Monroe Mills, a transfer from Oklahoma State. I interviewed him he called me as he was driving. He's from Missouri. He called me as he was driving from Missouri to Lubbock. He said he had just finished packing, and so you can. I have a pin story. You can go read that. But I think this is a guy who was fairly highly recruited 2 years ago. Just didn't crack the lineup, and he still has 3-4 years of eligibility. So a guy who, he said the coaches, they see him coming in competing for that left tackle job. You can have enough depth, on the offensive line, as we all know.
Yeah. The only other guy, I mean, you covered a lot there, but the only other guy I would mention is Brooks, the other Western Kentucky transfer. He was in town as well. So coaches clearly putting an emphasis on the offensive line. And, for me, if we have some loyal, Lubbock or Leave It podcast listeners, I was bitching to the high heavens as to why, you're taking 2 high school linemen a year, and in the first year, a couple of years of the previous, coaching staff, you've got, God love them, but you guys like Josh Berger and Ethan Card, those are your only ads. I say the more the merrier. At that position, you need bodies, and you need them right away. I mean, if anything, they're lucky that a kid like Caleb Rogers was ready to play. Most freshmen, 99% of them are not. And so, every guy like this may not be a splash on the headlines, I guess, is my big takeaway. But when you're talking reps and you're talking competition, and really just depth, when you get into the season and somebody sprains an ankle or needs a breather, right? I mean, this is going to pay dividends, because these coaches are taking over, and that's that's something that Coach McGuire talked about. And if you just kind of continue these parallels to Baylor, they're going to lean on the big guys up front. They're going to want to run the football. It's not going to be exactly what we think, verbatim from Western Kentucky. So, I just think it's important. And clearly, when we talk about the transfers right now and where most of that energy is going, it's been offensive line. So, what's cool to me is, as we're still learning about it, it's, transfer portals 2-3 years, old in terms of our everyday life and the almost normalcy of it. But you look at a guy like Jacob Rodriguez, and, really the reason he's here is because Virginia went through a coaching change, and you've got dozens, if not hundreds, of kids that sign a national letter of intent with a Virginia, with an Oregon, with a Nebraska, you name the school, and then they go away, and then they decide after a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, that they need to change the scenery, or they want to be back closer to home. And so I think, especially with Coach McGuire and the emphasis on the Texas high school football coaches and that network of relationships, I think that Tech can be a soft landing spot for some of these kids. Not only that, but, he's been at the college level for 5 years, and you've made the parallel to Baylor again, by saying they recruited him. And I guarantee they were giving him the same message. We think that your future is linebacker. And so, you've got to like that. It's very promising. That's a young man that's going to walk on this semester. And then, the idea would be to be put on scholarship. Last couple of times the program's done that, it's worked out pretty well. So that's what you like about the transfer portal, I think. And that's some of that potential, that you see, because I think even just today on Wednesday, we've had the TCU defensive end go in. We've had a defensive back from Georgia go in, who's originally from Texas. And you've had a running back from Penn State, who's originally from Texas. That's just one day. Right. And so you continually look at that, and you strategically kind of look at guys where you either have relationships or you have a need. And I think it's just, I think it's going to be even more prevalent. Again, your guess is as good as mine in terms of like what those open spots look like. But me personally, I tend to lean towards, if you really want someone, you're going to figure it out. You just are, if the opportunity's there.
Yeah, I think definitely, you look at the numbers. I did a whole scholarship thing, and it was between 81 and 86, right? Depending on the super seniors that, decide to return, like a Devin Drew, who we haven't heard from yet. There are a couple others. But I think an offensive line for sure, they want to add, I would say 1 or 2 more at the very least. If, defensive line, you mentioned the TCU guy, Ochon Mathis. He's like an all Big 12 type of, defensive end. And obviously the relationship there with Zarnell Fitch. But the whispers today were Texas is interested, and Gary Patterson's probably going to end up as an analyst there. So we'll see what happens. He's a name to watch, but the Western Kentucky O lineman Mason Brooks, I would say out of all the guys that we mentioned, he might be one of the most highly recruited as far as the portal guys, because he visited Oklahoma State, I believe Baylor as well. I think he has SEC schools after him. So Zach Kittley, Stephen Hamby, both coached him last year. Those relationships are in your favor, but it's going to be a major battle to get him.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a numbers game, right? And it's about, understanding the roster. I think what we've seen the most when the coaches first got hired, I said coaches, right? When Coach McGuire first got hired, there were still 3 games left in the season. He's filling out a staff. Everything's aimed towards the early signing day. Right after that, you basically are done or fill out your staff. There's some attrition with Cumbie going to La Tech, yada, yada, yada. Ultimately, you have the holidays. Now things are starting to settle down where, not that they weren't already doing this, right? But you can already see some of the relationship building, on the roster between the teams. And again, this is McGuire's experience. So if we're playing a drinking game and every time I mention Baylor, you're going to be drunk here in a minute. But, to that point, they've started a tradition they had at Baylor. They've started that and implemented it, as of today, with the roster and, putting guys on these different teams and having them do these different challenges. And so I think a lot of that comes clearly from Joey. But there's the reason I mentioned some of that, right, is there's a balance between the two. There's building a relationship and, building that culture, within the building. And then there's this other, however many minutes or hours in the day where they're, beating up the telephone and social media lines to get all of these kids in the door. Cause it's probably a good way to transition there. Ben is just simply saying, junior day, we started seeing the edits come out last night. You and I had been working on a list and we were just, for whatever reason, we were going to post it, I don't know, next week or something else, but now we've got a list posted. We originally started with 33 names. I think we're close to 40 names now. I think, pardon me, without going by names, what I would say is that sheer number, that amount alone, to me, my biggest takeaway there is recruiting is a numbers game. When you're coaching at Texas Tech, today, right? 2022, January, the way things are right now, you're not going to win all of the battles, for this top tier talent. But what you can do is you can control what you can control. You can bring in 8 different wide receivers. You can bring in 5 different offensive linemen. You can bring in, 7 different defensive ends, right? It's a numbers game. And some of these guys are going to fall in love with Lubbock. Some of these guys are going to fall in love with the coaching staff. Some of these guys it may be their first visit and they decide this is it for me, right? You never know. There's a lot of different things that can happen there. But one thing I'm a firm believer in recruiting is you control what you can control. And from going back to what I said with Coach McGuire starting, in November of last year, you've just seen this relentless pursuit on the recruiting trail. And we talked about it, I know it's been a while, but we talked about it last time. When you give yourself that many options and you're not so focused on this one running back or this one defensive end, and you have layers of options, that's where the success kind of breeds itself, because you've done your evaluations, you've started to build these relationships. And at that point, it becomes, hey, we want you to come to campus and see what we're all about. Clearly the message is being received very well, because when you've got that many kids coming to campus, I mean, I'm not going to say it's unprecedented, but from a quality of prospect, like, don't get me wrong, other coaching staffs have had 30 to 40 kids on campus, but we're talking about kids with no profiles and huddle links, right? We're not talking about 10 4-stars and a bunch of highly rated 3-stars. So I have to give props to the coaches. And Ben, I mean, it's still 2 weeks away. I think that list is going to do nothing but grow.
Yeah, I agree. And so like you just said, we've had lists with this many players before, but every single person that we posted holds an offer from Texas Tech. I don't know if we've ever posted this many before. And you mentioned just having the options, and I said this before we started recording. This is like a whole depth chart here. You can build like a whole, almost 2 teams with the amount of players that we have listed. It's just it's pretty insane. And at this point, we don't know who the top guy here is or the top guy here is. We'll figure all that out later, but very impressive.
Yeah, and let me ask you a question while it's fresh in my mind. Like,
Yeah,
I mentioned earlier, because I've been thinking about this, right? You mentioned earlier that for a good part of 3 years, the transfer portal has been a real thing. Everyone after the national championship, their opinion is, wow, these programs are playing a whole nother sport, another level. It's all 5 stars across the board, et cetera, et cetera. A realistic fan that follows recruiting knows that Tech is not going to, traditionally they're going to sign 2 4 stars, maybe 3, right? And that's just been the norm. Now a new coach can change that, right? Maybe it doesn't happen overnight, but I don't know, I'm curious your opinion, because I'm kind of the opinion that now that the transfer portal has been a thing, I think some of these kids that are on this list that are very very highly rated, and again, it's a lot of opinion from me, but if I'm a coach, I'm going to them and I'm saying, hey, look, yeah, I know you're confident. I know you believe in your game. But what's the upside of you going to Texas A&M right now? Right? There's 4 or 5 stars ahead of you. I can get you on the field next year, right? And especially if they're early enrollee, you can get them in the mix. I mean, of course, it's a new coaching bump. It's the opportunity to say that, but for me, that's the way I'm attacking it, right? Is hey, at Texas Tech, we've only had, I can count on my finger how many transfers we've had, right? It seemed like after the national championship game, both Alabama and Georgia, the floodgates opened, right? Same thing at A&M, same thing at some of these other programs. So I think it's fair, like in this war that is recruiting, I think it's fair to start shining a little bit of a light on that, because coaches that are good recruiters, they're going to tell you a lot of things, excuse me, at that level. But when you get there, not everything that glitters is gold, right? They're not going to hand you playing time. They're going to out recruit your position. I mean, that's their job. So when you get to that higher level, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of things that go into that, Ben. But I'm just curious on your thoughts, because I think we're coming to a head where, yeah, you can go and you can commit to the big logo program. But I think some kids are starting to see, well, look, they're going to go get a kid from Pennsylvania. They're going to go get a kid from California. If they can get them, they will take them. And everything that they told me or everything they promised me can get flushed down the toilet. Now, those kids have options, but I think it's a little bit of a different, maybe ethos or message coming from McGuire and his staff. And I just think that could be an edge possibly when you look at some of these higher rated kids.
yeah, it's really the Wild West at the portal. I just, I agree with you. There is some of that, but if you look at a guy, I mean, with the free transfer now, that's the thing. They could go to a place like Alabama, win a natty, and then transfer back to home. There's no penalty. They don't have to sit out. So I agree with that somewhat. I just think with McGuire and Blanchard, it's all just, relationship building and
Sure.
having the opportunity to sell, Texas Tech and their vision. It doesn't hurt when you bring in a guy like Zach Kitley, who you can just look at the stats and, his quarterback just broke the all-time record for yards and touchdowns in a season. All these things add up. And just personally, I think there's just a lot of good momentum with the football program right now. I think the type of culture that McGuire wants to build is going to sell itself, eventually, and players are just going to want to come play for Texas Tech.
Well, there's got to be go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I don't. I was going to say I don't really have an answer to the broad question. Is a 4 or 5 star prospect gonna turn down one of these SEC schools because they over recruit his position? I mean, I don't know. I just
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a little bit of all of it, right? It's when the product is humans, it's not something that's tangible for us to say, but what goes up must come down, in my opinion. And clearly Tech is going in this direction. McGuire's taking it in a direction where they're going to, they're going to play the numbers. They're going to make these kids say no, and I think they're going to develop those relationships and really stay in their ear about these decisions. Going,
yeah.
getting,
We got
yep,
a breaking offer over here to Dante Moore,
I
who
saw
is
that.
borderline 5 star prospect, number 13 prospect in the country. So, we talk about quarterbacks. Maybe he'll show up at the junior day in 2 weeks. Who knows?
That's right. That's Reggie Pearson's cousin.
Yep.
Okay. Well, there's your quarterback offer. So, we'll dive into those details and get that posted on the site. Well, that's a good little break to get us out of our own heads here on the ever changing landscape of college football. But to me, it's wildly interesting, and I think that what you're seeing right now, and for those of you that haven't seen it, there's no exaggeration. There are nearly 40 kids, if not already 40, on this list. And I just said the old, whatever you want to call it, the old typical tech line of you only sign 2 or possibly 3 4-stars. Well, I think there's a cause and effect too when McGuire comes in less than a couple months and has 3, or he has 5 total commitments in the 2023 class and 3 4-stars, highly rated kids. And so I don't see this momentum stopping. What's really interesting to me is if you do kind of focus in or subscribe to that numbers game. I mean, it's not wild to think that there are going to be at least a couple commitments that come out of this visit weekend. We see it happen every year. And if they're not commitments, they're kids that after this junior day set up an official visit for April 1 or, April 15, whatever the timeline is. And then, shortly thereafter, we start to see that momentum take shape. So I don't know, Ben. I mean, I know I've been sick. You did most of the work here and I helped where I could. Any guys you want to call out? Any guys that you think folks should take another look at
From the junior day list?
Yes.
I'm always looking at the West Texas guys just because the obvious connection, but a couple of 4-star athletes, Jamari Davis from Clarendon, Anthony White from Abernathy, and 4 stars. I believe White has a family member who played for Oklahoma. Davis, he is listed as an athlete. I think the tech coaches want him as a safety. He also has offers from like Kentucky, Purdue. But you talk about guys who, I'm not saying these guys are going to commit. They're 4 stars. They have several other options. But as far as, you mentioned, there's probably going to be 1 or 2. I'm always looking at the West Texas guys, just because of how those things usually work out. Ton of receivers, linemen, athletes, DBs. I mean, like I said, there's a depth chart at every position. So it's very impressive.
Yeah. And I think, for me, I know people don't want to hear it because, it's never been an issue for tech to recruit receivers. I would challenge that a little bit. Receivers do grow on trees in Texas, but you look at this group that's going to be in town. There are some real dudes that are on that list. And I think that, a lot of people were on the fence about Emmett Jones. And, I would say to those people, I would just wait a tick, right? Because he has real relationships. And he wanted to be here, last go around. And so he's here and it's full steam ahead. I mean, I think you have some high quality on that list. The other group, I mean, just to be Captain Obvious, would be the defensive ends. These are guys that have serious offers, serious talent, and to get in early and to build those relationships. I mean, we've talked about him a couple times here, but Coach Fitch, when he zeroes in on his guys and builds those relationships, we've seen some real results already, not just at Texas Tech, but certainly over his time at TCU. And, I think between the defensive ends and the defensive tackles, I mean, let's put it this way, Ben, right? And not to like look backwards, but I mean, even have 1 defensive tackle visiting, let alone 2 over the past year before the new coaching staff came in. I mean, that would have been breaking news, right? Now it's just like, hey, cool, these guys are coming.
Well, and not just any. I mean, the Demarion Thomas is a 5.7 and Ansel Nidor is a 4-star. So like these are high quality. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about it. This is it's an exciting time if you like keeping up with recruiting.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be, busy times for us. I've already started, like I mentioned earlier, with the QB interview. Got a hold of one of these receivers. We're just going to keep going down the list here. And I think it's a good way. Those interviews, especially with the new staff, it's a good way to learn about some assistant coaches that maybe you don't know as much about. You learn about their recruiting style. You learn a little bit more about them from these interviews. So we'll keep posting those. But I mean, the biggest takeaway that I'll just reiterate is this is a numbers game. plain and simple, right? And we can talk about, it's so easy for people to get caught up in Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, Texas, whatever these quote unquote big schools in college football are. If you're Texas Tech and you can compete and win against TCU, Baylor, and Oklahoma State, that should be all you care about, honestly, right?
Yep.
You're going to snipe some guys every once in a while from that other group. But if you trust your evals and you win those battles, then that's where you've got to be. And it could be that you all go after the same 15 kids and you all get 5 of them, but you have to get your 5, right? And I just think that that's such an important point to make, because it is easy to get caught up in rankings, star averages, stuff like that. It is January. I would not worry about stars, rankings, any of that.
All those schools you mentioned have played for Big 12 championships. You can get there by recruiting this type of player. So
Yeah,
there's no reason that Texas Tech cannot get there.
That's the best way to put it. Well, Ben, we have a new quarterback offer to go chase down. So I know we touched on it, a little bit, but that's kind of a big deal, right? You have, I mentioned it in my story, you have Austin Novasad, who was a longtime Cumbie target relationship there. I think Tech would have been in the mix had things not changed, but it happened. He commits to Baylor. He's off the market. Everything he talked about out of the U.S. Army All-American game last weekend was that he's firm with Baylor. He's recruiting for Baylor. Jackson Arnold's a national recruit out of Denton Guyer. So, again, the beauty of this is you're playing the numbers. You're saying, hey, maybe we get Jackson Arnold to visit. Maybe he considers Tech, but we need to keep looking. And interestingly enough, when I started looking into Kitley and what he did at Western Kentucky, because off the top, obviously Western Kentucky is what it is, right? You're not recruiting the top of the top to Western Kentucky, but you're having to go turn over rocks, right? Obviously had Billy Zappi, brought him along, et cetera, et cetera. But, they went and they signed a 3-star out of California, right? Yeah. And so that's when I kind of convinced myself, okay, well, you look at the state of Texas and the guys I just mentioned, beyond that, there's not like so many standouts or kids that are maybe proven, if you will. Sure. Maybe this next year will bear that out and they'll get on the road and they'll see some of these kids and eval themselves. But I kind of saw this coming with offering some of these guys from a national standpoint. And just because of what you'd said, Ben, all you got to do is send them a couple clips of Billy Zappi and his stats and be like, hey, you want to come do this? Yeah. And that should be the conversation. Now, I know football doesn't work that way. If it did, Tech would just clone Patrick Mahomes and put him in, when the next one leaves, right? Patrick Mahomes or whatever, right? It doesn't work that way. However, when you have consistency at a position and consistency in an offense, it can work that way. And so I'm just wildly interested to see what they do at this position, but it doesn't look like they're going to settle for just anyone. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, you mentioned, and we don't know. We still have all these camps this fall or this spring and all that to go through as far as quarterbacks in Texas. But I'm just thinking like back to a couple of years ago, the Baron Morton class was, so loaded. He was like the 6th ranked QB in Texas. It's just insane. I don't think
same thing last year.
Yeah. So, but no, we'll see who they get to visit, whether it's Arnold, whether it's more with the, Reggie Pearson's, being his cousin. You have to like that family relationship. How much does that mean to a guy from Detroit, Michigan at the end of the day to come to Lubbock? I don't know, but it hurts nothing to offer. So
no, not at all. And you've been doing this a while now. The one constant is getting them on campus, right? Yeah. So we can sit here and talk about 40 kids. We can talk about a numbers game and all that. The bottom line is getting them on campus, breaking those perceptions of what Lubbock is and what it isn't, all those other things. And then, I think the one constant when we go back to that mantra of controlling what you can control, you're going to get the juice. You're going to get the effort from McGuire and his staff. I think that's been made abundantly clear. Obviously they'll keep it up. But yeah, they're going to stay on these kids. So when you get a kid, like we mentioned with those defensive tackles and stuff like that, you get them on campus. I think the coaches are just going to stay on top of them until they have a reason not to.
Yep, I completely agree.
All right, Ben. No, go ahead.
Well, did you want to get into basketball at all? I heard they had a
Yes,
pretty
sorry,
big
we
win yesterday.
we talked about that. Forgive me, my sick brain. So I am a long time. I always throw out I don't know anything about basketball recruiting. I couldn't tell you the names, why we're recruiting that position, or what the spots are. You do. You're a little more plugged in. What I will say is I do watch all the games. And I know there was a lot of doubt about Mark Adams coming into this year. So what I asked you in the pre-show, you always ask if we can talk about basketball. I don't say no, but most of the time it's not relevant to the conversation. So I said yes, and the reason I said yes is he had his fair amount of doubters, right? Everybody chirps at the Goodmans and the Rothsteins of the world, and whatever
Everyone,
you're
like you're
sure.
not included as part of that. Everyone.
Oh, I no, I'm not even interested enough to say whether he was a good hire or not. I mean, you can go back on the boards. I never even
Oh, I
been
was
involved.
talking about now with your replies to Goodman. They cracked me up.
Oh, yeah, no, he can shut up. No, I mean, well, anyway, so the culture was there. It's been there, since Bobby Knight, love him or hate him, whatever, right? It's been there before that. Tech basketball's won basketball games. So get out of here with that. Anyway, bottom line is there were some doubters. There were people that were skeptical, right? You go in, our text group, when it comes to basketball or RRS, it blows up. I could take a break. I could go to the bathroom and come back. There could be 32 messages about the game that night, I get it, right? There's a lot of juice there. I'm rounding into my point here is to say you start off conference play. Unfortunately, had all the COVID with Iowa State. You are looking at a daunting schedule of Kansas and Baylor, right? You beat the number 6 team and you beat the number 1 team. In my recruiting brain, right? You've got a new coach in football. He may have his own set of doubters the closer we get to football season. This is the equivalent of knocking off Oklahoma, right? And then knocking off like a highly rated Baylor team in 2 consecutive weeks. That's what the equivalent of this is, right? When you really
Yeah.
boil it down. I know there's more games in the basketball season, but my main question is this, right? What for a guy that maybe had, and this doesn't, I mean, I know I mentioned the Goodmans and the Rothsteins, but you trickle all those opinions down all the way through AAU, all these important things on the basketball recruiting trail. What do those performances mean for a guy like Coach Adams and his staff in terms of opening doors on the recruiting trail and getting, it's not like they're getting, any leftovers on the recruiting trail by any means, but what does it do in terms of, we're talking about junior days and these 4-star DTs coming in and stuff like that. What does it do for a guy on the hardwood like Adams when you put together a week like they have so far?
I think it's huge on several fronts, just because if you look at the team that they have now, some of these guys were highly recruited, but most of them were transfers that Adams brought in. Only 5 guys stayed after their previous coach left. And so, Mark Adams and his staff, he put together a great staff, first of all. They got to work. They brought in, some pretty good transfers, but also guys who, we'll be honest, maybe weren't playing as much at their former stop, like an Adonis Arms, who was playing 17 minutes a game at Winthrop. And then you look at last night, he's out there destroying the number 1 team in the country. And it just validates everything that they've done. It shows you that Texas Tech basketball is not going to go away. They have already signed 3 good high school prospects, and then Jalen Tyson, who's a transfer from Texas that everyone is familiar with. Those guys are locked in. And, we've also posted about a couple other, visitors and targets that they have, 2 5-stars that, will make decisions in April or, sometime in the future. So, I mean, it's just huge. And I don't see this slowing down. My one thing I am curious about is you could lose, we don't know what the roster is going to look like next year. They have 4 super seniors, so already have 4 signees. They're still targeting, a couple other high school guys, like I just mentioned. So, you only want to go so young in basketball. Part of the reason they're winning now is, they added a lot of veteran, older, experienced transfers. So, it'll be interesting. It's a no doubter if they can get a Johan Traor, who's a 5-star forward, one of the top 5 players in the country, that would take him. There are other targets too, but just overall, you couldn't be more impressed with the start to Mark Adams's tenure. I mean, especially when you consider they beat Kansas without Kevin McCullough or TJ Shannon. They beat Baylor without TJ Shannon. Um, these guys are supposed to be, Shannon's supposed to be your best player. McCullough is supposed to be one of your best players. And you went out, you beat a Kansas. He came back last night on one ankle and just again, he took it to Baylor, had a great game. So those would be my overall thoughts on basketball.
Yeah, and I'm showing my age here because I know you're a little younger, but were the Lubbock Cotton Kings still a thing when you were in college, or had that
Not
long
as
past?
far. I got to Tech in 2013, so I'm not familiar with them.
So on the broadcast, and I didn't know this, so maybe I'm showing my lack of knowledge that I already, illustrated earlier. But it said that in between his life as a basketball coach, he took a break and he was the owner. And I hope I remembered this correctly, but he was the owner of the Lubbock Cotton Kings. So if I would have known that before any of this head coaching stuff was considered, I would have said we got to hire this guy, because the Lubbock Cotton Kings, when I was in college, they had dollar beer night on Thursdays, and we're all aware of like the bubble or whatever's across from Danlaw Field. That's where they played hockey. I don't even like hockey. Hockey in person is very entertaining versus watching on TV. But as a college kid, when you can get a dollar beer that's like this big, we were there every week. And so if that was his idea, God bless Coach Adams. He's a genius. And who couldn't have seen this coming? But I saw that and I was like, should I text the group or should I have already known this? So I thought that was wildly interesting. And I don't know. I mean, I think I told the story on here. A couple of my buddies run the West Table, Dirk's, Lubbock Brewery, stuff like that. So when we're in town, we went and saw him when Mason did the Tech football camp this summer. And, when you see somebody like that out and about, and whether it's Lubbock, Dallas, whatever, you try to respect people's privacy, Well, try telling that to a 7-year-old, And so Coach Adams was in the Lubbock Brewery across the hallway there after we finished dinner, enjoying a beer with a couple of friends. And I said, hey, Mason, no, he's with his friends. Like, let's not bother him. Man, he didn't listen to me at all. He darted over there. First of all, he shouldn't have even been in a brewery probably at 7 years old. And he just went up to him and said hello. And Coach Adams couldn't have been nicer. And so I just think that, between that little dumb story and what you see from the man on TV, and you talk about culture, or people want to tweet about culture. I mean, just look at the players, hugging him. Just look at the locker room after a big win. I know that those aren't the most glowing examples, but to me, he was the guy fighting a bear, even when you had another head coach. He's the guy like kind of implementing some of that juice. And I want to say, like, again, I don't follow this, but you'd have to correct me. Early on, the Chicago Bulls were trying to hire him, and we thought that was kind of a foregone conclusion. So I think the guy has proven his own merit. And I'm happy for him, because this past week has kind of cemented that with some of those national talking heads that, okay, this isn't just a replacement or a holding on to what was, this guy's a legitimate option in his own right.
Yeah, absolutely. You get those type of wins. You get to do interviews with the Goodmans and the Andy Katzes of the world. Say what you want. That all helps your program, and there's just a lot of buzz. Again, just like football, basketball. The amount of you see Patrick Mahomes is out there tweeting about Texas Tech basketball. That's insanely valuable. So. They got another tough game tomorrow, Oklahoma State. That was a COVID postponed game. They got another game at Kansas State on Saturday. So 2 quick turnarounds, and I'm excited to see what happens. And I'll actually be down in Lubbock later this month for the SEC challenge against Mississippi State. So it'll be my first home basketball game.
You're going to junior day too. There we go. We've got a plant.
I would go to junior day, but I don't know if that's allowed. But no, it'll be my first home basketball game since before COVID. So it's been a while, and I'm just excited to get back out there.
Well, if it goes well, you should turn around and go back for February 1st. That's the one, huh?
You got a ticket for me? Because I'll go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we know a few guys. Finagle it. It just depends on, how much you really care, Ben. I mean, you'll find one.
I care a lot. Who doesn't care a lot is
Uh,
my full-time employer at the bank I work at. So I don't think I'll
Yeah.
be able to make the Tuesday night tip, unfortunately. But I'll watch it on TV though.
Well, guys, that was your annual basketball recruiting coverage here on the Lubbock or Leave It podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. No, I'm just kidding. We'll work more of that in there. I'm not opposed to talking about basketball. Just in the off season, I don't know if it gets my juices going, but I know you're into it, and I know a lot of people are into it. So we'll do a better job of that. But guys, the momentum is real. We've got 2 weeks till that massive junior day. And we just kind of touched on a little bit. The basketball team will be hosting Mississippi State that weekend. So you'll have some of these recruits that leave town and head off to do other things, some that they're able to stay and go to that game. What I wanted to mention, Ben, and we don't have to get into it, but there are a couple kids that are coming before and or after
Yes.
that junior day. And these are 4-star Rivals 100 kids. And so I wanted to make sure that, folks knew about that as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, Brendan Jordan this weekend, he confirmed with me again from Mansfield. He actually visited, I believe, Oklahoma State game. He came for one of either that or the Iowa State, one of the first games after McGuire was hired. I believe he was on campus, and so
Mhm.
it'll be his second time. And then the next weekend, Ryan Yates recently listed Tech in his top 8, and I know you did an interview with him, but I wanted to mention on that 22nd, I believe there will also be Eric Gray. Told me he's going to come visit. He's the offensive line commit for 2022. And then I know that there's going to be a handful of preferred walk-on types. So I don't know exactly who all is going to be there, but I expect to see some more visitors around, those days as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Ben and I'll be all over it, talking with these kids. But again, I mean, you've got just in that short blurb alone that we had we forgot this Rivals 250 and this Rivals 100, defensive backs were coming in town, right? I mean, that's how kind of surreal some of this is right now, when it comes to recruiting. So anyway, glad we were able to get back on here. You'll start seeing these on a weekly basis when we're not down and out with the vid. But for Ben Golan, I'm Matt Clare. This has been the Lubbock or Leave It podcast presented by Carnley Properties. We will see you guys next week.